We now begin the lecture for Module 3 on animal research, and we will consider critical issues, animal rights, and limits on experimentation. The information that we will discuss on animal rights and animals in research will originate from arguments from these resources. The text number 1 listed on our syllabus, as well as Animal Rights Opposing Viewpoints by Bender and Leone by Greenhaven Press, 1996. So first, we make the general statement. Many people accept the following moral principles. All humans are equal in moral status. All humans are of superior moral status to non-human animals. And the Cartesian argument by René Descartes is stated as a syllogism with 3 statements. If a practice does not cause pain, then it is morally permissible. Unlimited use of animals for scientific purposes would not cause them any pain. Therefore, the concluding statements, syllogism is premise 1, premise 2, and conclusion. So therefore, the use of any animal for any scientific purpose is morally permissible. We continue to develop these arguments through now the unlimited use or knowledge argument. If a practice produces knowledge, then it is morally permissible. Unlimited use of animals for scientific purposes would produce knowledge. Therefore, unlimited use of animals for scientific purposes is morally permissible. There is a deficiency here in that the testing of cosmetics is frivolous and should be abolished. So it does generate knowledge, but it is considered frivolous. So there is a weakness in the arguments so far. Important knowledge argument then follows. If a practice produces important knowledge, then it is morally permissible. Unlimited use of animals for scientific purposes would produce important knowledge. Therefore, unlimited use of animals for scientific purposes is morally permissible. The freedom argument continues. If an action causes pain to another being, then it is not morally permissible. The use of animals for scientific purposes causes animals pain. Therefore, no use of any animal for any scientific purpose is morally permissible. So we see that we are now at two opposing ends of the spectrum. We then proceed to an informed consent argument. If an action causes pain to another being without that being's informed consent, then it is not morally permissible. The use of animals for scientific purposes cause animals pain without their informed consent. Therefore, no use of any animal for any scientific purpose is morally permissible. The harm argument. If an action harms another being, then it is not morally permissible. The use of animals for scientific purposes harms animals. Therefore, no use of any animal for any scientific purpose is morally permissible. The innocence argument. If an action causes harm to an innocent individual, then it is not permissible, no matter what the circumstances. Animals are innocent. The use of animals for scientific purposes harms them. Therefore, no use of any animal for any scientific purpose is morally permissible. We note the addition of a statement in this argument. This now is extending from the syllogism model to the Toulmin model of argument. The moral agent argument continues. Only moral agents can be innocent. Animals are not moral agents, therefore animals cannot be innocent. The modified innocence argument. It is wrong to harm the innocent unless we have a very good reason to believe that this is the only realistic way to prevent equal harm for many other innocents. Animals are innocent, therefore it is not permissible to harm them unless the conditions set forth in premise 1 are satisfied. At least a great deal of the use of animals in science harmful to them fails to meet the conditions set forth in premise 1. Therefore, at least a great deal of this use is wrong. The rights argument. Only those individuals who have rights can be innocent. Animals cannot have rights, therefore animals cannot be innocent. The utilitarian argument. Acts are not morally permissible if they cause pain to some individuals and yet fail to bring about the best possible consequences for everyone involved. A great deal of the scientific use of animals causes them pain and fails to bring about the best possible consequences. Therefore, a great deal of this use is not morally permissible. So where we are headed is to see that the statements in the IACUC, the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee Animal Use Protocol application form, that got very long, are consistent with the endpoint that we're going to reach in these discussions of the various arguments, so that we realize that researchers, scientific researchers who use animals are subject to the regulations that arise from these types of arguments at the level of the regulatory agencies in the United States, such as the USDA. So all animals are equal is an argument presented by Peter Singer. And the statement is, speciesism is an injustice parallel to racism and sexism. So in other words, the actions taken on other species by humans is considered to be an injustice based upon the overall or overriding principle that all animals are equal, human and non-human. So in clarifying the general principle of equality, there is the statement, the case for equality between men and women cannot validly be extended to non-human animals. Women have the right to vote because they are capable of making rational decisions about the future as men are. Dogs, on the other hand, are incapable of understanding the significance of voting, so they cannot have the right to vote. The generality and analogy argument extends from this. Men and women are similar beings and should have similar rights, while humans and non-humans are different and should not have equal rights. There are obviously important differences between humans and other animals, and these differences must give rise to some differences in the rights that each have. So the basic principle of equality does not require equal or identical treatment, it requires equal consideration. Equal consideration for different beings may lead to different treatment and different rights. Humans come in different shapes and sizes, moral capacities, intellectual abilities, amounts of benevolent feeling and sensitivity to the needs of others, abilities to communicate effectively, capacities to experience pleasure and pain. If the demand for equality were based on the actual equality of all human beings, we would have to stop demanding equality. So this sets the stage basically to claim that animals have rights. So these are the rights of animals that you note are part of the International League of the Rights of Animals, a Universal Declaration of the Rights of Animals, September 1977. So it's nothing new to the 21st century. So all animals are born with an equal claim on life and the same rights to existence. All animals are entitled to respect. Man as an animal species shall not arrogate to himself the right to exterminate or inhumanely exploit other species. It is his duty to use his knowledge for the welfare of animals. All animals have the right to the attention, care, and protection of man. No animals shall be ill-treated or be subjected to cruel acts. If an animal has to be killed, this must be instantaneous and without distress. All wild animals have the right to liberty in their natural environment. whether land, air, or water, and should be allowed to procreate. Deprivation of freedom, even for educational purposes, is an infringement of this right. Considering an animal's capacity to suffer, beyond these rights, the capacity for suffering and enjoyment is, however, not only necessary, but also sufficient for us to say that a being has interests, at an absolute minimum, an interest in not suffering. So now we can start making some arguments for these animal rights. So the first is a case for weak animal rights. Recognition of rights, and then whether they are strong or weak, is extremely important in setting the stage for what might be acceptable and what might be unacceptable. So Marianne Warren, from Animal Rights Opposing Viewpoints, puts this case to our attention. Argue the case for ascribing strong moral rights to all normal, mature mammals. It is unpersuasive. So this is the stand taken by the author. It rests upon the obscure concept of inherent value, which is defined only in negative terms. It seems to preclude any plausible answer to questions about the moral status of the vast majority of sentient animals. The strong animal rights position leads to unacceptable conclusions, that we may not kill rodents when they invade our houses, for example. It also ascribes moral rights to a much wider range of animals, not just normal mature animals, but all sentient beings, whether warm or cold-blooded, vertebrate or invertebrate. Thus, the weak animal rights theory asserts that any creature whose natural mode of life includes the pursuit of certain satisfactions has the right not to be forced to exist without the opportunity to pursue those satisfactions. 2. Any creature which is capable of pain, suffering, or frustration has the right that such experiences not be deliberately inflicted upon it without some compelling reason. 3rd, no sentient being should be killed without good reason. So we are seeing the rights basically as they were stated, included in these arguments or assertions. The strength of the reasons required to override the rights of a non-human organism varies depending upon, among other things, the probability that it is sentient, and if it is clearly sentient, its a probable degree of mental sophistication. So there are some critical points here, such as the obscurity of inherent value. So the postulate that subjects of a life have inherent value is put to question. If the inherent value of being is completely independent of the value that it or anyone else places upon its experiences, then why does the fact that it has certain sorts of experiences constitute evidence that it has inherent value? Some things are inherently valuable and yet are not the sorts of things which can have moral rights. So there are some unclear cases. Mental capacities, are they equal to sentience? And subjects of a life regardless. So the mere existence of life creating a situation of total equality. So why are animal rights weaker than human rights? There is one difference between human and non-human nature. And basically we say humans have rights based primarily upon the nature of the human or human nature. And animals, because of their nature, have questionable natures of their rights. That wasn't worded the best way, but I think this will become more clear as we proceed. So with a clear moral relevance, we see that people are at least sometimes capable of being moved to action or inaction by the force of reasoned argument. So this brings us to the statement of rationality, which is defined as being able and morally compelled to recognize one another as being with equal basic moral rights, or being able to listen to reason in order to settle our conflicts and cooperate in shared projects. In other words, human language becomes very important. And it provides greater possibilities for cooperation and for the nonviolent resolution of problems. So we need an articulated system of morality to regulate our conduct. So the recognition of the moral equality of other persons is the price we must each pay for the recognition of our moral equality. Can human society exist only in a state of chronic and bitter conflict is a key question. Because we cannot reason with most non-human animals, we cannot always solve the problems which they may cause without harming them, although we are always obligated to try. So reasoning with animals then becomes a question. Aristotle stated, the capacity to alter one's behavior on the basis of reasoned argument is relevant to full moral status. So this is a key term, obviously, here. So if there are animals with whom we can learn to reason, then we are obligated to do this and to regard them as our moral equals. So from these series of statements, then, we can proceed to discussion on animal experimentation, whether or not it is justified. So Michael Allen Fox, from the same source, is presenting the case for arguing that animal experimentation is not justified. So we must abandon the anthropocentric position. Anthro, of course, meaning human, anthropo, meaning human, and centric, centering on humans. So humans, thinking only about humans, at the exclusion of all other species. So why animal experimentation cannot be justified can be argued on any theory of morality. A basic principle is that we have an obligation to avoid causing harm to others. So again, these are principles of non-maleficence and beneficence. So the harmful avoidance principle is always called the principle of non-maleficence. So the assumption here is that when one merely omits to perform a morally desirable act, others are usually no worse off than they were before the omission. They have just lost out on some further benefits they might have enjoyed had the action been performed. So no immediate loss, just potential loss. So critical questions then. Should the principle of non-maleficence be extended to animals? Can animals be harmed? All species have their strengths and weaknesses, and none is inherently superior or inferior to the other. Creating then the central issue. If we argue that their lives may be made either better or worse for us, that they have a welfare or well-being that may be injured by us, then few would disagree that we can harm animals and have an obligation to avoid doing so. Seems an inherent conflict. So when we perform cost-benefit analyses on animal research, if we consider the animals at all, our assessment is primarity in terms of the cost of them versus the benefit for us. So here is a tentative list of permissible experiments. Experiments that cause no harm, those that are non-invasive clinical observations of normal and pathological conditions, field studies, and those that utilize alternatives to live animals. This information that we're covering now, much of it at least, you will see showing up very directly and discreetly in the proposal format for the IACUC. So experiments that benefit the individual experimental animals. Experiments in which animals willingly participate, where willingly does not mean some trivial reward is offered to a previously deprived animal, for example, an ape language learning or dolphin training with a food type of a reward. So experiments where harm is caused but for which offsetting or compensating benefits are given to the subjects. Experiments that benefit other animals of the same or different species. Experiments that are life-saving and where widespread loss of human life is threatened directly by animals as disease carriers, for example. So this completes our discussion of the arguments. We will proceed to other lectures to continue the arguments in more practical terms of the procedures that we must follow to get approval to use animals in research.